Good morning. أهلا وسهلا. تفضلوا.
الاجتماع السنوي للبنك الآسيوي.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 8th AIIB Conference 2023.
El-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Mr. Jin Lichuan, President of the Asian Infrastructure and as Vice President and Corporate Secretary of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and Secretary of the Board of Governors, it is my privilege to warmly welcome you to the opening ceremony of the 8th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We are honored to be joined today by His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of AIIB to express our deep gratitude to him and to the government of Egypt as the host of our annual meeting this year. We are most grateful for the generous hospitality and unwavering spirit of partnership that the government and people of Egypt have demonstrated in hosting AIIB's first physical annual meeting since 2019. During today's opening ceremony, we will hear addresses from a number of highly distinguished speakers. Then we will move to a panel discussion on mobilizing private capital for infrastructure investment. We are honored that His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, will respond to the panel discussion with his own remarks. Before we hear from our first speaker, I would like to invite you to watch a short video on AIIB.
Humankind has always faced challenges. But those who work together, those who think differently, are those who can overcome anything, providing the answers, no matter how difficult the challenge. Today, our challenges have never been more frightening. They threaten our world. They threaten our children's world. But though our challenges may seem insurmountable, by working together, we are a formidable force. Where there was danger, we're creating a safer world. We're providing safe water and sanitation for millions of people. Where there was isolation, we're bringing people together. Together with our partners, we're connecting people to a whole world of possibilities. Where old ways aren't working, we're bringing new. We've created one of the world's largest solar resources, providing cleaner, greener energy for this generation and the next. And together we can do more, much more. Working with our clients, we can overcome the challenges that threaten our future. Working together to provide the infrastructure for tomorrow, we will create a world where our children will thrive. It's because we're meeting, our first ever in Africa, with our friend, founding member and host, the government of Egypt. We are creating a platform for a deeper exchange, for cooperation and collaboration, to drive sustainable growth in a challenging world, and provide the sustainable infrastructure for tomorrow.
It now gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Jinli Chuan, President and Chair of the Board of Directors of AIIB, to give the opening address.
Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Mustafa Madboulle, Your Excellency Dr. Mohammed Mait, Chair of the AIIB Board of Governors and Minister of Finance, Egypt, distinguished governors, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the 8th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. On behalf of us all at AIIB, I extend our deepest appreciation to the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Egyptian people for such gracious hospitality and superb support during the annual meeting located at the nexus of Asia and Africa. As one of the greatest civilizations of human society, human history, Egyptian infrastructure has long occupied a specified place in the world's imagination. From the truly timeless marvel of the Pyramid of Giza to the Suez Canal, through which 12% of global trade flows, Egypt has long been a home for grand visions and dreams of a new tomorrow. Indeed, the new Suez Canal project, implemented in record time thanks to the keen attention of President el-Sisi, exemplifies the transformative impact of well-planned and executed infrastructure projects. The development of infrastructure investment and new administrative capital is all too palpable. Distinguished governors, our post-pandemic world faces a litany of economic challenges. Growth projections are being downgraded. Inflation and interest rates are at decades high level. And in the wake of COVID-19, public budgets are more strained than ever. Yet, the world continues to grow. The infrastructure financing gap continues to be yawned for ever larger. There is an ever-growing need to support members as they grapple with the ever more frequent natural disasters. We see some of the recent tragedies in Morocco and Libya. And most importantly, the clear and present danger of climate change menaces us all. Expectations of MDBs have never been greater. We must do more, and dramatically so. If multilateralism is the melody of global cooperation, then this annual meeting is but one chorus in the never-ending refrain towards a more prosperous tomorrow. some 45 years ago. Egypt's visionary president Anwar Sadat wrote in his memoir, "There can be as many separate ones." This is the essence of the multilateral ethos that shaped AIIB's formation in 2016. I'm proud to say that today, 8 years into operation, AIIB has been recognized as an integrated component of the global financial system. AIIB remains in the gene pool of multilateral demand banks with the special features of a multilateral demand bank fit for the trends that bind all MDBs together. We are effectively contributing to MDB reform, including by implementing the G20 CAF review recommendations, while also establishing new initiatives within esteemed partners at breakneck speed. Our bank's recent joint announcement with the World Bank of $1 billion guarantees ever a selection cooperation to strengthen the performance of the MDB system. We are also proud of our finance, the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, along with our close co-financing partnerships with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the European Investment Bank. Such cooperation exemplifies AIIB's DNA-coded commitment to partnership in addressing development challenges. Over the last year, we announced agreement with many esteemed partners, philanthropists, the Pandemic Fund, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, the Energy Transition Accelerator financing platform, and with COP28 presidency. In addition to our multilateral and development partners, our bank's capital market partners have been crucial to scaling up our efforts to support our clients. 3 weeks ago, our bank achieved early completion of our 2023 funding program with the successful issuance of $2 billion of 3-year global bond, with $4.8 billion in bond issued by our bank since its inception. It testifies to the broad confidence of investors in the bank and in our commitment to financing infrastructure for tomorrow. Furthermore, in May this year, our bank issued Asia's first ever climate adaptation bond, marking a significant milestone in adaptation financing. Today, I'm delighted to announce the launch of our Climate Action Plan. The plan outlines our ambition to bring capital, capacity, and convening power to help our members in their efforts to address climate change. We will elaborate. This plan builds on what is already a significant area of focus for our bank. On July the 1st, we fulfilled our promise to align all new financing with the Paris Agreement. Furthermore, we have already attained the goal of annual climate financing of 50% or above of the total approvals by 2025, with climate financing accounting for 56% of annual financing in 2020. President El-Sisi, in the same beautiful city of peaceful, same beautiful city of peace almost 1 year ago, 1 year ago, you spoke of the sobering mission as you see in the words hold true today, that future generation must not bear the consequences of mistakes that they did not make themselves. That now is the time for action and implementation. That trust lies at the heart of ability to act as one. If our global village is to withstand the storms brewing, on our horizon. It will be due in no small part to the actions of everyone here today. AIIB is acting. We are acting in concert with our MDB peers and other successful assembly over the next few days, and invite you to explore new opportunities for partnerships as we work together to invest in the green infrastructure for tomorrow. Thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for your inspiring leadership of this bank. I'm now delighted to invite Her Excellency Dr. Sri Mulyani Indrawati.
Thank you so much. His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of the Egypt, Mr. Jin Lin Kung, the AIIB President, His Excellency, Prime Minister of Egypt, as well as my colleague, Dr. Mohammad Maid, Minister of Finance, His Excellency, Mr. Marco Primorac, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Korea, fellow governors, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to all of you. First, I would like to thank His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi for the hospitality and also holding this very important meeting in this beautiful country, Egypt. I am delighted to be joining the 23rd annual meeting in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. This is my third time. It's actually within 12 months in these countries. I'm very proud to see the growth of the AIIB in its 8 years of operation. The members have grown rapidly to reach 106 members, while also having its economic turbulence, including energy and food crisis. I appreciate AIIB for its continued support to all member countries, including Indonesia, and becoming our strategic partners in infrastructure development. As we are all notice that the current global economic situation is creating a big challenges for many countries. The rising geopolitical fragmentation and higher interest rate have led to a subpar economic growth, as well as increasing debt vulnerability for most countries, especially and most importantly, the client country of AIIB. The projection of the growth this year is going to be much lower, to only 2.9% in 2023, comparing last year of 4.1%. Many developing countries, including emerging countries, need substantial resources to address post-pandemic situation and recovery, while also maintaining their commitment to climate change. Developing countries definitely require extra support and huge financial from both advanced countries and multilateral development banks, as well as private sector. Therefore, I urge all the advanced country and multilateral development banks, including AIIB, to be able to realize their funding commitment with a more affordability and concessionality for many member countries which are facing both economic and financial situation work. In addition, I also strongly support AIIB's commitment to target 50% of its portfolio for climate financing to support member countries in achieving their climate targets. This is a huge ambition. In line with global climate agenda toward net zero emission, Indonesia has created Energy Transition Mechanism Country Platform, which was announced during the G20 presidency last year, in order for us to be able to increase renewable energy development and accelerate energy transition. There is no development without the need for more energy. But we also very aware that the energy should emit less carbon. So for all of us, it is not about recognition of this challenge, but how we are going to be able to address by providing the right blended finance, especially under current very high for longer interest rate. Indonesia, using the platform, including currently as a chairman of ASEAN, led and established the ASEAN Taxonomy version 2 that are more compatible and interoperable globally. This is necessary condition for the private sector participation on the financing of the climate agenda. These are all the steps which we are looking forward to share with you, but also with the AIIB to come up with a solution. As the financial institution that is operate with cleaner, greener, and leaner, AIIB.
Since it is the first time for Croatia, an AIIB full member as of the end of 2021, to participate in the bank's annual meetings. Allow me also to express our gratitude to the host country, the Arab Republic of Egypt, also one of the founding members of the AIIB, for its warm hospitality and all the efforts to make this event a success. Thank you very much. AIIB is a multilateral development bank with sustainability at its core. As a full member of the multilateral community, it makes an active contribution to joint multilateral efforts to solve some of the greatest challenges the world is facing today. Supporting and achieving the climate agenda certainly falls in this category as one of the toughest challenges. Therefore, the AIIB's activity in that direction represents an important role to play. After many climate-related crises and disasters we have witnessed over the past few months and years, we very much welcome the launch of the AIIB's Climate Action Plan as announced by President Jin in his speech earlier today. This is a clear demonstration that AIIB is deeply committed to furthering the global climate agenda and supporting its members in mitigating and adapting to the impacts of the climate change. In this context, over the coming years, we encourage the bank to set an ambitious business plan focusing on supporting the green transition primarily across its regional members, including by accelerating private capital mobilization in that respect, thus contributing to stronger achievement of both targets as set by the 2021 to 2030 corporate strategy. The efficient use of the AIIB capital and the application of international best practices is, however, a prerequisite for effective contribution to sustainable development across the region and beyond. Nevertheless, we believe that the bank possesses adequate strength to proactively reach out and engage deeper in regional economies especially those that rank as the most vulnerable. As witnessed recently by the record demand for AIIB sustainable bonds, there is also a clear indication of the institutional investors' interest to support the bank in exercising its sustainable economic development mandate. This momentum should be seized. Over the last couple of years, AIIB has attracted quite a number of non-regional members, thus strengthening international partnership and hence the global security, stability, but also prosperity. Driven by multilateralism, many opportunities have been opened for the non-regional membership quota to exchange experiences with the propulsive Asian markets, as well as to boost creation of the new skills on both sides. In this part of the world that connects 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe, through the sea, AIIB supported projects in its founding member, the Arab Republic of Egypt.
The latter interrupted the physical attendance of such meetings for a period of 3 years, in addition to a negative impact experienced on all economic and social sectors from the pandemic. In addition to the inflation that has affected the world, especially the emerging developing economies significantly, and led to limiting their ability to confront a much greater challenge, which is climate change and its negative effect. The flood that claimed lives in the country of Libya. Ladies and gentlemen, our meeting comes at a time when the world needs more cross-border international cooperation and communication, which is one of the most important axes of the work of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as it's a multilateral bank that aims to deepen international and regional cooperation to achieve sustainable development and confront all global difficulties and challenges by investing in infrastructure and building mechanisms to do sustainably and justly. It's a hedge for member states against future risks, and the bank's vision is in line with Egypt's Vision 2030, which made our country one of the first founding countries of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and had a pivotal role in formulating its goals and work mechanisms. Since the start of the bank's activities in 2016, the AIIB and its 106 members have interacted in 4 main axes: green infrastructure, climate change, regional connectivity and cooperation, technology-enabled infrastructure, mobilizing private sector capital, and increasing its role in economic development. This is considered one of the priorities of the Egyptian government and its economic reform program to establish valid foundations and rules to support the most convenient business environment and investment climate. This is attested to by the head-up event held by the Egyptian Ministry of Finance and its new headquarters in the new administrative capital between representatives of the Egyptian private sector and the senior management of the Asian Infrastructure Bank to explore strengthening areas of cooperation between the private sector and the bank that could arise with the presence of such an international entity in Egypt. It's worth mentioning that AIIB was able to reach all the continent to become the 2nd largest multilateral bank in terms of number of members in a short time. In light of Egypt's collaboration with the board of directors, we always look forward to increasing and deepening aspects of cooperation between Egypt and the bank in various sectors. Perhaps the most important of which is increasing the participation of the private sector in the bank's projects by expanding the circle of partnership projects between the public and private sectors and increasing the focus of financing, especially in green projects, adaptation against with confident steps in implementing a development and sustainable financing agenda that can benefit all the members, as the number of projects financed by the bank has reached 232 projects covering covering many sectors, the most important of which is the green infrastructure sector and technology-enabled infrastructure, with a value of $44 billion in 35 countries. Despite all these successes, there is still a lot to the bank can do in order to achieve the sustainable economic development in its member countries. Dear guests, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank represents an important and effective development partner for the Arab Republic of Egypt, as it provides a real and strong opportunity for the Egypt's private sector, consistent with what the Egyptian government emphasizes, the importance and centrality of the role of the private sector in leading the growth in the Egyptian economy and help to achieve the requirements of the new republic. And the Egyptian people are working to build a solid infrastructure for the benefit of the current future of the generation. The bank's investment portfolio in Egypt has amounted 1.3 billion so far, with the future great opportunities with more than 100 billion in various sectors, relying on the private sector to implement these projects. And ladies, we find the Asian infrastructure investment gives these countries the opportunity to be effective and strong and contributor to the management of the bank and to achieving their development. And through the cooperation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, emerging and developing economies, and international and regional multilateral financing institutions, we will be able to provide needed resources with easy and appropriate terms. So we can find that AIIB is giving the chance to all these countries in order to be more effective in managing the bank and to achieve sustainable development through the collaboration of AIIB with the other institutional African institutions like the Expert Bank and the IFC and the other institutions that are regional and multilateral. The emerging economies can provide good and sustainable tools that correspond to the developmental goals. That's why the AIIB members have to work hard in order to develop and improve more economic vision and to have sustainability in the development all over the world, and to contribute to the financial structure we are having today. We are still having a great collaboration between all the regional and the international entities. And during the next 2 days, we hope that the voices of emerging economies and the private sector will reach everyone, and that we are all looking forward to setting up foundations for comprehensive and sustainable development, deepening the contributions of the private sector in multiple investment activities presented on the regional and national scene, and mobilize financial resources to private investment. In addition, we are looking to open horizons to contribute to developing infrastructure and stimulating local and foreign investments in partnership with the private sector, which contributes to attracting more investors to priority development sectors, whether to Egypt and other developing countries. In conclusion, I wish you all rich discussion and fruitful deliberations that will help us reach what's best for everyone. Thank you for listening and thank you for attendance. And peace be upon all of you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency and Chair Minister Maid. Egypt's support for AIIB as an institution that operates with high standards and strong multilateral governance is deeply appreciated, as is your encouragement for our future growth and development. In a moment, there will be a high-level panel discussion exploring the importance of private capital mobilization in bridging the infrastructure investment gap, and what multilateral development banks such as AIIB can do to facilitate this. But before we begin, I would like to invite you to watch a video on AIIB's collaboration with Egypt.
على خريطة العالم بتفصلنا حدود ومسافات، لكن بيجمعنا نفس الطموح وبتواجهنا نفس التحديات: التغير المناخي، الزيادة السكانية، وغيرها. لكن التحدي الأهم والأكبر هو توفير الموارد واستغلالها بشكل يساعد على تنمية الإنسان ويحافظ على البيئة للأجيال اللي جاية. ولأن التحدي كبير كانت الفكرة. في ديسمبر 2015 يشهد الاقتصاد العالمي لحظة تحول بعد إعلان الصين بمشاركة 57 دولة تأسيس البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية، واللي بيهدف لدعم الحكومات لتأسيس بنية تحتية خضراء مدعومة بالتكنولوجيا الحديثة.
AIIB plays a significant role in multilateral development with our high standard projects and modern governance. We finance infrastructure for tomorrow with a strong emphasis on mastering climate change and mobilizing private capital.
خلال سنين قليلة من التعاون المشترك بين الأعضاء اللي وصل عددهم ل 106 دولة، قدر البنك يساهم في تنفيذ مشروعات عملاقة في مجال البنية التحتية في أماكن كتير من العالم، واللي وصل عددها ل 233 مشروع بتمويل قيمته 44.6 مليار دولار في 35 دولة. كان طبيعي دولة بحجم مصر بتاريخها وثقافتها بوزنها السياسي والاقتصادي تكون عضو مؤسس في البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية، ده غير إنها الداعم الأكبر للبنك في أفريقيا والشرق الأوسط بحصة تمويلية قيمتها 650 مليون دولار.
القيادة المصرية اهتمت بأن مصر تبقى متواجدة في محافل الدولية وخاصة الكيانات المالية الدولية وتوفير تمويل والمساهمة في التنمية، وخاصة المشاريع اللي هي بتبقى ليها نوع من التواصل ما بين القارات أو عبر الحدود الدول.
مصر كان شايفة أن دوت يتوافق تماما مع أولوياتها ومع رؤيتها لتطوير البنية التحتية وللربط مع العالم الخارجي ومع باقي القارات، خصوصا أن مصر موقعها الجغرافي متميز جدا، هي بتربط ما بين آسيا وأفريقيا وأوروبا وعندها قدرة أنها تلعب دور أساسي في الفكرة دي.
تم إبرام عقد تمويل ما بين البنك الأهلي المصري وما بين البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية سنة 2021. البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية بيستفاد من شبكة الفروع بتاعة البنك الأهلي المصري بجميع التحتية في مجال الدعم الفني وتقييم الأثر البيئي والمجتمعي للمشاريع اللي هو بيمولها.
ولأن أهداف البنك تتوافق بشكل كامل مع توجهات الدولة المصرية في الفترة الأخيرة، كان التعاون بين الطرفين واللي نتج عنه مجموعة من المشروعات في قطاعات مختلفة بمساهمة من البنك وصلت ل 1.3 مليار دولار.
Our largest portfolio outside Asia is in Egypt, and we are working on a pipeline of investment opportunities of a similar size. As part of this, we are financing large-scale renewable power, the Banban solar PV program, for instance, our first private renewable project in Africa. In addition, our Alexandria-Bukir Railway gives an access to low-carbon public transport. We provide sanitation to hundreds of thousands of homes.
البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية ساهم مع طاقة في تمويل مشروع بنبان العملاق، وده جمع 32 مطور عالمي شغل 16,000 فرصة عمل من الشباب المصريين، ومشروع بإجمالي استثمارات 2 مليار و2 من عشرة.
يمكن ابتدى بطولة شغل البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية معانا في قطاع مرافق مياه الشرب والصرف الصحي سنة 2018-2019، وهو خدمات الصرف الصحي المستدامة في المناطق الريفية. هذا المشروع بنتكلم على 178,000 وحدة سكنية يتم ربطها على المنظومة المتكاملة اللي احنا بنقول عليها.
ده بالإضافة إلى أنه جاري العمل بين مصر والبنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية على عدد من المشروعات، منها تمويل غير سيادي مع بنك مصر لتمويل مشروعات البنية التحتية المستدامة بقيمة 300 مليون دولار، تطوير ميناء الحاويات بدمياط بقيمة 140 مليون دولار، إصدار سندات الباندا باليوان الصيني لإنشاء مشروعات خضراء مستدامة تصل قيمتها ل 500 مليون دولار. بالرغم من أن مصر بتمثل نقطة مهمة في حركة التجارة بين أوروبا وآسيا وأفريقيا مواني، لكن بعد التاريخ ده اتغير الحال. حفرنا قناة السويس الجديدة اللي اختصرت زمن عبور السفن من 22 ل 11 ساعة في المجرى الملاحي الأهم في العالم. اتحركت الدولة بكامل قوتها وتبنت خطة قومية لتطوير قطاع الطرق والنقل والمواني بتكلفة 1.7 تريليون جنيه مصري. جددنا وسائل النقل البري ودخلنا وسائل حديثة زي المونوريل والقطار الكهربائي. بدأنا خطة تنمية شاملة في سيناء وبنينا أنفاق جديدة للربط بينها وبين باقي مناطق مصر علشان تكون جسر حقيقي بين الشرق والغرب. وعلشان نواجه تحدياتنا بنينا عشرات المدن، من أهمها العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة اللي راعينا فيها نسب المساحات الخضراء بالمقارنة مع مساحات المباني. ولتحسين ظروف المعيشة أطلقنا في 2019 مبادرة حياة كريمة اللي بتهدف لتقديم حزمة متكاملة من الخدمات في مجال التعليم والصحة والنواحي الاجتماعية.
خلال ال9 سنوات الماضية استطاعت مصر أن هي تستثمر وبقوة شبكة قوية جدا من الطرق والكباري والأنفاق، وده بيؤهل مصر أنها تقدر تستقطب استثمارات إقليمية وأجنبية بقوة خلال الفترة القادمة.
عندنا النهارده الحقيقه برضو مواني ومناطق لوجستيه بنيت على احدث الوسائل ووفقا لافضل المعايير، وعندنا كمان بيئه تشريعيه بتساهم وبتدي مسانده كبيره للمستثمر المحلي والاجنبي.
من اكثر المزايا اللي موجوده في مصر والجاذبه للاستثمار المشروعات البنيه الاساسيه اللي بقت موجوده في كل اماكن جمهوريه مصر العربيه.
الاستثمار في البنية التحتية بيهيئ المناخ لجذب استثمارات في عدة مجالات وتهيئة العوامل المناسبة لجذب هذه الاستثمارات وضخها في الاقتصاد القومي.
وجود قيادة وطنية واعية وعندها رؤية مع شعب عظيم زي الشعب المصري، احنا رسالة بنقولها: مصر قادرة وهتكمل مشوار.
مصر التاريخ، مصر الحضارة، أم الدنيا اللي علمت العالم، النهاردة بتفتح باب لتحقيق تعاون وشراكة حقيقية، والتنمية هي هدفنا.
After this beautiful video, for the final part of this morning's program, bilateral development banks in private sector capital mobilization for bridging the infrastructure investment gap. AIIB Governor and Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. His Excellency Mr. Mehmet Şimşek, AIIB Governor and Minister of Treasury and Finance of the Republic of Turkey. Mr. José Lito Camacho, member of AIIB's International Advisory Panel and former Secretary of Finance of the Philippines. Mr. Hassan Alam, CEO of Hassan Alam Holdings. His Excellency Mr. Dr. Mohamed Maid, Minister of Finance of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Peace be upon all of you, His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. This is a panel discussion. I'm going to speak in Arabic, so please put your headsets. This is a panel discussion about the role of the developmental banks in mobilizing the investments in the public sector, the private sector, in order to invest in infrastructure and to help and contribute to sustainability and creating job opportunities. Concerning the infrastructure projects, especially in the developing countries, the rate of such percentage is larger than in any country. For example, in a multilateral in infrastructure all over the world. However, for many reasons, it's not easy to benefit from the private capital in order to do so. And the multilateral banks like AIIB, the AIIB can play a pivotal role in the participation of the private sector in investments, especially infrastructure, and especially in the emerging economies. That's why one of our main priorities and our main goals in the strategy of the AIIB Bank, the main strategy of the bank is to mobilize the financial resources from the private sector and enhances the contribution of the private sector in investments and projects. So the bank is playing a good role and contribution to enhance investment in infrastructure as a priority in order to enhance economic development. This is a panel discussion in order to know more from our guests about how, for the developmental banks, especially AIIB, how these types of banks can achieve their own goals represented in establishing an information system and a system that corresponds to the mobilization of capital, and in order to contribute, help the private sector to contribute to sustainability and economic development in our countries and to improve the livelihood of our citizens. My first question is for Mr. Hassan Allam, the CEO of Hassan Allam Holding Company. You have participated in investing in infrastructure in Egypt. How can you assess and evaluate the challenges that is faced by the private sector in investments? And what is the role of the multilateral developmental banks and how they can contribute to investing in infrastructure and encouraging the private sector? Thank you so much. I'm going to answer in English.
To start off the conversation, Africa and the Middle East are home to approximately 1.5 billion people, and the average age is 19, which means that this part of the world is very much ripe for infrastructure investment and in great demand for infrastructure investment to take place on an accelerated pace, to overcome years and years of a lack of spending on critical infrastructure that is needed in the healthcare, education, water, and clean energy sectors, and transport sectors as well. Having said that, the role of the private sector is clear. The opportunity exists, real demand exists, just because of the sheer population size and the need for these services that are now lagging behind due to a lack of development that has happened over the course of previous years. Some countries have accelerated this growth, like Egypt, and have bridged this gap to a certain extent and are now in a leading position, and other countries are lagging behind for multiple reasons. So the opportunity is there. The main challenge is to be able to create programs that allow these public-private partnerships to take place and to move at an accelerated pace to match what is required. Award takes an enormous amount of time, which sometimes changes the dynamics of the project and sometimes causes it not to come to surface in due time. So to respond to the second half of the question, which is how can MDBs help us? We know that in reality, the demand is there. The private sector is more than happy to cooperate and invest so long as there is a clear procurement process, so long as risks are mitigated. And MDBs can support in aligning with governments a procurement process. They can support in providing affordable financing. that reduces risk and doesn't require massive sovereign guarantees that sometimes slow down the development of these much needed projects. And finally, they bridge the gap between what the private sector would ultimately need to see and benefit from and what the government wants to achieve in terms of social development.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You have pointed to a number of challenges and also that the need for MDBs to play a bigger role in alleviating those challenges. I will ask the same question to Mr. Jose Olmacho, Finance Minister, former Finance Minister of the Philippines. You have taken this post in the Philippines, but currently you work in the private financial sector. You are aware of the financial capabilities of different countries in financing their needs, their citizens' needs of infrastructure, and you also know the expectations of investors and all their needs. And hereby we ask, in your opinion, how can the private and public capital work together in a better way or in a better partnership? Are asking different MDBs, especially AIIB, about what they can offer to encourage these partnerships in this field between private and public sector.
For this opportunity to share with you some observations and views coming from both public and private sector, as I have done. As you rightly pointed out, I think there's certainly a big gap in financing infrastructure, requiring the collaboration between the public and the private sector. And here, when I talk public, I want to make reference specifically to governments, and they're represented here by the governors of the AIIB, but also the MDBs themselves, which have a very important role in this collaboration with private capital. I think Hassan has already mentioned expectations of private capital. And with private capital, I think it's also important to recognize that there are two types. There are strategic investors, people like Hassan and his family, but there are also financial investors represented by banks and the capital markets. I think for governments, I'd like to say that the expectation of private capital is that governments should provide an investment climate where investment policies are predictable, they are clear. Towards private capital will know that when they go into an economy and invest in infrastructure, that they will be treated fairly like everyone else. I believe that for most governments, there's also an opportunity to encourage more of this private-public partnership by establishing private property programs, or PPPs, as they are known in many economies, perhaps even establishing an office to directly promote the PPP program so that it's clear. Again, the expectations are clear on both sides. We know which segments the government would like to channel private capital in terms of infrastructure. And there are many examples around the world. I'm not sure if Egypt already has one, but I would certainly encourage it. The third point I'd like to share with, especially with government representatives here, is that there are infrastructure. There are some governments, specifically in Asia, I can think of Singapore and Thailand, that have established legal frameworks that allow the establishment of infrastructure funds or business trusts that allow capital to flow freely, perhaps even allow for listings of these investment funds or business trusts in their stock exchanges, providing for public capital to enter. Now, MDBs has a very important role as well, and specific to AIIB, I know it's done a great job over the 8 years that it has since it was established, but there's a lot more it can do. I guess the most critical aspect where MDBs can play a role is really bridging the gap between the risk of inherent in projects, and the risk that private capital is able to take, because it is not able to take every risk inherent in projects. For instance, there are many frontier markets less developed economies where public capital cannot just enter because they don't have the appetite or the ability to take the risk of those frontier markets. MDBs can certainly provide credit enhancements, credit guarantees, so that such economies can access the public capital markets. There are, for example, specific to infrastructure, the early stage of infrastructure development, construction fees can play. Longer-term durations, private capital to be able to develop. So again, MDBs like the AIIB can cover those. Local currency risk, a risk that is very important to address. Foreign capital does not have the ability to absorb local currency risk, and yet infrastructure projects by nature generates local currency, not foreign currency. So again, you need intervention to be able to bridge that gap. Political risk, I mean, something that MDBs are very familiar with, very important to private capital. A second area where MDBs can play a role, in my mind, and relating to the earlier comment I made about government, providing legal frameworks that will allow the freer flow of private capital into infrastructure. Active role. The limitation of investing in private equity funds is that you're subject to the appetite and the processes and the values of those private equity funds. May not necessarily always align with what the AIIB would like to accomplish. So I would certainly encourage the AIIB and other MDBs to take a more active role in perhaps even leading those project finance ideas, directly investing in infrastructure, not necessarily through private equity funds, and perhaps creating those funds themselves that are much more closely aligned to its values and its mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Jose Matthew give some homework for President Jen to take home. And also for us, he mentioned many elements which could help in ensuring that private-public partnership can work better, and also more support from the MDBs. Now I go to Her Excellency Sri Mulyani and Ruati. يعني هي زميلة وصديقة عزيزة.
She's a dear friend of mine and a finance minister of a country that's considered one of the policy makers around the world and most dynamic in Asia. And our question for her will be, what are your political priorities through which you can attract and facilitate the process of private investments in infrastructure, especially that Your Excellence has presided over the G20 last year. And this was one of the topics that, like multinational MDBs, and how they can move finance towards the private sector in a way that it can contribute with a major role in the process of development. And as for the AIIB and for other MDBs, from your point of view, what can be done from your own point of view? What can be done in the coming stage, especially from the side of the AIIB, in light of the challenges that governments face now, that they're unable to pump more investments in infrastructure, and in a bigger need for MDBs to help and support the private sector to play a bigger role in this regard?
Minister Ahmad Maid. First, I think what already mentioned by two previous speakers on the perspective of the private sector. The political and policy priority for any government in order for us to be able to invite more private sector, and especially on the infrastructure, which is more complex in this case, is first to provide the right regulatory and policy framework. And that is actually being recognized by two previous speakers. And this is the area which the AIIB can advise in terms of what kind of policy framework, because usually country knows what to do, but not necessarily know how to do. What is easier to be understood than the how, because the how is related to the capacity, technical, and even sometimes political feasibility. So this area on a policy-making process, regulatory framework, being widely recognized, but how to implement from designing the legislation, implementing in terms of the institutional building, and creating certainty and consistency in implementing those policies is going to be very important. Here, the role of many multilateral development banks, including MDBs, can provide through their instrument. I think AIIB is now stepping through the pandemic, that they are now talking about program loan rather than the project loan. This is the area that can be expanded. The second one, we are all knows that the private sector have all their own risk taking as well as risk appetite, and usually huge gap between the public activity or infrastructure with the ability of the private sector in which they are going to accept those kind of risks. And that's why what is being advised, policy and political priority, including Indonesia, is establishing this kind of bridge, catalytic. We created special mission vehicle within the Ministry of Finance in order for us to establish project development fund, because we can see that, oh, we need infrastructure, but how you are going to develop the project? It's going to be takes times and technical expertise. How you are going to make sure the financial is going to be also feasible? Then we create a lot of instrument, for example, like viability gap, in which we are going to create this kind of bridge between the appetite, rates of return of the private sector, and the economic rate of return of those infrastructure or the project itself. I think this is the area in which MDBs, including AIIB, have the expertise in actually not only providing advice, but they also can create this catalytic role also. Because government usually, especially in developing poor country, their instrument is not strong enough and not credible enough. And that's why it need to be supported by the institution like the MDBs or AIIB. For an emerging country, they maybe have a more track record, has been recognized by market, and that's why we can provide those kind of instrument like project development fund, guarantee fund, viability gap fund, those which is creating this match between the appetite of the private and the real project rate of return and risk itself. So this is the area that AIIB could provide more instrument so that they can supplement and creating a catalytic role for many countries which need this kind of support. The third one, we are also know that many of this infrastructure is actually have the local currency revenue. If it is even generating revenue, whether this is water, electricity, telecommunication, while borrowing is on a foreign exchange. And that's why this mismatch between the currency is going to be one of the biggest that can affect the feasibility and rate of return. These are the area also that could provide AIIB through the local currency bonds market, or in this case, providing a certainty in terms of the maturity mismatch and the currency mismatch. Because as two previous speakers mentioned that usually private sector, they can stand under 7 years, 8 years, but not 30 years, unless the government providing a certainty in terms of guarantee, contract, or in this case also related to this uncertainty on exchange rate as well as maturity. So these are all very heavy environments. And AIIB is, of course, financial institution, and that's why you need to have more providing financing. Because infrastructure is more maybe work on engineering, environment, but at the end of the day also need a very sound and strong what we call it the financial structure that is acceptable from the private sector appetite, but at the same time also accountable from the public sector point of view. Because public official and for us as a minister, they are going to be scrutinized from the political optic rather than financial optic. But it doesn't mean that you can only pass the political optic without passing the financial optic, because then you cannot get this infrastructure to be delivered. So I think these are all the area. Indonesia, using the G20 in this case, as well as ASEAN this year, as you asked, we try to promote this private sector, for example, on climate and related to the sustainable development finance. We know that this kind of complex situation can only be addressed if we work together. That's why during the G20 presidency, we continue promoting and strengthening the cooperation. We established a blended finance. Because again, the blended finance is not only public, private. There is a lot of philanthropic. In this case, we just really want to provide. But how you are going to combine and blend this finance that is going to be working effectively in achieving this problem. Now, Indonesia is already announcing like SDG, Sustainable Development Goal Blended Finance, in which we put our own money, but then we provide platform for many other source of financing, both MDB, private sector, as well as philanthropy. They can make a choice between whether they are going to invest in a just lending, which is usually that is the easiest, then catalytic and risk management. These are all maybe the blended finance is going to be one of the most important tests for this climate change as well as financing can be delivered. I think many countries already making this kind of announcement. Indonesia during the G20 is already announcing the energy transition mechanism with the JETP. That is how we are going to jointly mobilize global financing in order to finance the transition of the energy in Indonesia. 20 billion has been announced. Now need to be translated into a transaction, and that is the real work. And last thing, on the ASEAN chairmanship, as I mentioned earlier on my opening, private sector usually also participate through the capital market, and they need to see whether financing climate change is not punishing them. For Indonesia, meaning that when we retire coal power plant, they are going to be seen that you are financing coal, although it is actually retiring coal. And that's need to be answered through this policy framework like taxonomy. That's why we're promoting the ASEAN taxonomy version 2, in which providing more clarity what kind of financing which is qualified as green, yellow or amber in this case, or totally red, which is prohibited. So these are all the area which I think AIIB as an institution need to continue supporting a lot of homework for many developing and emerging country challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Sri Mulyani. I think you've touched a lot of very important points, and you've mentioned one of the points which I think the AIIB has to take it into consideration on the matching between local currency and foreign currency in order to push for investment. I think this will be one of the challenges for mobilizing capital for private sector. And I think the AIIB has to take into consideration how to allow the private sector and support the private sector to go for raising capital internationally. We will listen to President Jen to know his view on that. But let me now talk to His Excellency Minister Mohammed Shemshik. I know you received your post recently, not far away, as a Minister of Finance for Turkey, and you are the governor of Turkey for the AIIB Bank. And I think you are you similar to some other Minister of Finance facing challenges, a lot of challenges, and managing the budget and determining يعني تحديد الأولويات. I know the private sector في تركيا.
We know that the private sector in Turkey plays a major role, and their participation is major there, is very big in Turkey, but also in the framework of a bigger enhancement and bigger cooperation in the project of infrastructure. And if you ask MDBs, especially the AIIB, to play a bigger role, we will ask the same question. What are your suggestions and your demands to different MDBs and the AIIB? What would you like from them to do to encourage more investments to be pumped in this framework, to invest in infrastructure.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Egypt for the excellent organization and also warm hospitality. Clearly, the MDB's balance sheets and domestic fiscal resources are not enough to cover the needs in infrastructure investments. So there is a compelling case to attract private sector financing. Over the past couple of decades, we managed to attract about roughly $50 billion in transport, in transport infrastructure and also healthcare, mainly from private sector. And I think the key here is government guarantees that provides predictability. But of course, you have to have sustainable public finances, meaning you have to have good fiscal discipline, sound fiscal policies. That's one of the key to ensure that your guarantees ultimately will be delivered. MDBs can play a significant role in mitigating the risk, in de-risking, because private sector doesn't want to commit long-term funding, in particular during the construction period. It's a risky period. The completion risk is there, the construction risk is there. There are all sorts of other risks associated. So it's really critical that MDBs step in with creative, innovative financial solutions. I know the balance sheets are not, going to be large enough to provide all that. So that's why creativity matters. What really is important is to help reduce risk, and that's what we call credit enhancement. We worked very closely with the likes of EBRD, IFC over the past few decades, and of course we got a lot of financing globally, both from the West and of course from Asia like Japan and Korea. I think the reason why we succeeded in attracting that much money was largely associated with sound fiscal policies of the past few decades. But equally important, government guarantee has helped, and the MDB's involvement clearly was very helpful. Going forward, we've largely done with our basic infrastructure and healthcare investments. What we are focused on really is green transition. It's really not a choice. It's a necessity. Last year, we paid $97 billion for imports of oil and gas. This year, we're paying about $75 billion. So we are strongly focused on investing in renewables. This will help us achieve the net zero goal by 2053, but more importantly, it will help reduce our dependency on imports of oil and gas, and of course, clearly that's the way forward. The other area that we are focusing is to deepen domestic capital market, so that domestic assets, domestic savings pool can also be directed. I think having a well-functioning private pension schemes sometimes helps, because those are long-term funding sources, and they can be committed, deployed to infrastructure projects that pay off over the long period of time. Not to repeat previous speakers' points, you should treat infrastructure investments like a long-term bond. And I think the more predictability and visibility is there in terms of sound policies, right investment climate, and also risks associated with it, the more likely you are successful in attracting the private sector funds, and it's really key. As far as AIIB is concerned, I think having local presence in countries is very important, because when you have local presence, you can identify bankable projects easily. You can also work with authorities, and you can also rally domestic resources. So I think we would encourage MDBs, in particular AIIB to start building domestic presence in member countries. I think that would certainly be very helpful. And as I said, to focus on more providing guarantees rather than providing the full funding if we were to attract private capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To provide more guarantees. So this is what His Excellency Minister Mohammed Shemshik mentioned. I think, President Jen, you've got what we are looking forward from the MDBs and يعني LIIB تحديدا.
Especially with the growing role that they have gained in the past 8 years. This question now is, what will the AIIB do to facilitate, with all the challenges that we have discussed, how will they help the private sector to have a bigger opportunity to move these funds and these finances to invest in infrastructure and to bear a bigger share in development and bridge this gap in financing infrastructure in a lot of our countries? You know the number of the countries that you yourself know. There are more than 60 years, and they all look forward to the bank to bear this responsibility and to have a share in it. What will you respond? How will you respond to that?
We share the cooperation with the private sector partners as well as the development partners in the public sector. And by working almost 80 years now, we can feel better. The private sector's feelings, their demand, and their requests to the MDBs, how we can work together. When we started the conceptualization of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, we thought at the very beginning, with the support of almost everyone, like Egypt, in creating a multilateral development bank fit for the 21st century. This bank must be able to provide both public and private sector non-sovereign guaranteed financing to reduce the public pressure on the government's balance sheet. So starting from day one, this bank operates under the same roof, 2 branches, public sector and non-public sector. But we work together. Our teams can take both the public sector financing and non-sovereign backed financing with experience gained from other institutions. So we understand fully the importance we must pay to the mobilization of private sector development. Now, first, we understand private sector vote with their feet. So only when they work in a country with a very good enabling environment for business, the ease of doing business is very much important. The policy, regulatory policy must be predictable, consistent. If there's any change, there must be change for the better. So the private sector would feel comfortable. We are here keeping constant dialogues with our client members' governments to understand them and to see how we can work together to provide such a climate, doing business climate for the private sector to participate. So predictability. And we understand the private sector people are willing to take risks, but they are reluctant to take uncertainty. So this is what we've been doing. Secondly, there are lots of very good, promising private sector projects. But in many low-income countries, it's very hard to finance those projects, which seems to be a little bit costly. So we work together. We feel comfortable. They are not worried about refinancing every couple of years. And the third is we try to make it possible for the private sector investors to take the infrastructure investments as the asset class. And in so doing, the private sector could find some very good ways of doing business. For instance, we have the Bayfront. We have the Bayfront investment management demonstrate that we understand they look for this. So Bayfront is a platform for securitizing infrastructure loans that allows institutional investors to invest as an asset class. So this is a new asset class, and it would be offering opportunities for the private sector investors to do more investments. So we understand it's important. That's why the corporate strategy would guide us to achieve more than 50% of the financing in the private sector. So we will continue to be working with the public sector and the private sector investors to understand them better and to fine-tune our lending policies and strategies. So by working together, we can create a future which is better for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jen. فخامة السيد الرئيس
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the name of Allah, allow me in the beginning to welcome Mr. Jin and all the gentlemen and the finance ministers and all the honorable guests who are with us here today. We're very pleased to have this opportunity of hosting this conference after a hiatus of almost 3 years. We held previous virtual conferences in 2020, 21, and 22. And here in Egypt, we are in Sharm El Sheikh, hosting it for this year, and we were very keen on preparing the city of Sharm El Sheikh in the most convenient way to host this conference that we hope for the best to achieve in. Let me comment first on 3 points. The first is our appreciation for the bank and the role that it achieves in the past years and the level that they have reached in an unprecedented time. It became the second MDB with the ability to have a financial portfolio worth $1 billion with a rating from Fitch, for example, a rating of AAA with a stable vision of it, and also the financing that they have provided in the past few years, as mentioned in the presentation, more than $44 billion for over 50 countries, for over 200 projects, which is amazing. But allow me to say this needs more and more finance, low-cost finance, especially in light of the current circumstances, the economic circumstances the world is going through through COVID-19, the 2 years of COVID-19, and the repercussions of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. In light of these very hard economic circumstances the world is going through, to have an MDB institution like this that needs to invest or to pump more low-cost investments, especially in emerging economies or weak and poor economies in light of the challenges that we're discussing. As for the cooperation of the bank with Egypt, I also record my appreciation, state my appreciation. We're talking about a portfolio that's worth $1.3 billion, and we look forward for more. That's the first point, and I don't wish to add any more than what have already been said. But the second point I would like to talk about now is the very important discussion that we had on infrastructure and the role of the investment, the private sector in it. I will talk about the Egyptian experience in that as to enrich our discussion more and to offer you our experience in this regard. We had, in the most honest words, we had a major gap in infrastructure in Egypt. And we had two paths to go through. One related to the country to have investment projects that are very encouraging to finance the infrastructure that can take the Egyptian economy to better horizons, or to encourage the private sector to move along with us in these projects. I'm not just talking to the guests who are here with us. The Egyptian people are listening to what we're saying right now, and it's important for the Egyptian people to know that this path could have been very successful with the private sector, but it would have taken a longer time to bridge this gap, and I'm saying a major gap in infrastructure in Egypt. The private sector could have done this, whether Egyptian or otherwise. They could have bridged this gap, but I think that the time frame and the requirements that we were obliged to achieve would have taken much more time. We as a state have worked through the past 8 years with all our efforts to bridge and end this gap and to have a basic infrastructure for the state in all fields, especially that what I'm talking about here is this gap was not just in one sector other than the other. It was in every sector, in energy sector, in transportation sector. It was a major gap. So the effort made by the state and what we have achieved in the past 7 or 8 years, a lot of it has been achieved through loans to achieve so that we don't go through dilemmas of reaching our goals, so that our state can be capable with its basic infrastructure to go through and work with the Egyptian private sector that we highly appreciate. And this is not just for the conference you're talking. No, I will talk about the measures that we have taken in the past few years to encourage the private sector in. But let me say once again, our experience is that we have spent a lot of money to make the perfect infrastructure for our state so we can reach better horizons in the development of different fields. Our path as a country, as we said, is that the state itself is responsible for doing this and responsible for providing the investment financing. We're not talking about billions, we're talking about trillions here. Trillions of dollars and pounds that have been spent in the past 8 years to build this infrastructure that we are talking about right now, that we can humbly say that it has become very developed, very capable, and very sufficient to move forward for a better economic future. Is the private sector now? Has it been far away from achieving this? No, the private sector has been working with us hand by hand. The private sector companies worked in these projects. Private sector companies weren't able to achieve them alone. We contributed with a large part, with a very large share of these financing that went to the private sector companies to operate in the perfect way. That's why I imagine that the private sector companies that work with us, that's almost 5,000 companies. Most of the projects that have been implemented in Egypt have been by Egyptian companies from the private sector. Is our state today, does it have the political will to make sure that the private sector is leading development in Egypt? Yes. It already exists and have been translated not just into words, but into statements from the government, from the political leadership represented in the president, but also we have stated before in the we aimed to say that all the exceptions or the privileges that the public sector enjoyed have been cancelled, and now we deal with equal opportunities. We deal in equal opportunities. We give equal opportunities to all sectors from both sectors. That's why the High Council of Investment have initiated more than 22 decisions to make incentives, to offer incentives to the private sector to make it more able to operate in the Egyptian state. The third point I would like to talk about now is that we have launched a number of projects, almost 140 or 150 projects. We said that we will give them incentives up to tax exemptions by 10% or 15% to work in the projects that we give priorities to. I'm saying this because Mr. Jin and the infrastructure that we are aiming to achieve, and I have already said this before many times, I'm talking now about Africa, through our experience here in Egypt, in infrastructure, we have come to know that not only through good planning, but planning and implementation and realizing what we have done, that this is very important to us, very important for the African continent to develop and become bigger. And this will happen through low-cost financing, because all the economic challenges that I have spoken of before in the past 4 years until now, I've always said that we need low-cost financing so that the financial burdens wouldn't become bigger on the Egyptian state in this regard. And that's the role of an MDB like you to share with us today. I will not take any more time. I welcome all of you here in Egypt. It's the first time to have this conference here in Africa and in Egypt, and we wish you very fruitful discussions. I wish you all the best, and please remember to take the opportunity to entertain yourself. We will not just talk about business. Welcome, everyone, once again. Thank you. Thank you very much.